262 miles per hour. That's the speed at which an experimental flying train was measured on January 22, 1969, crushing the previous world record by a whopping 57 miles per hour. Named Aérotrain by its inventor Jean Bertin, this unique train, emerging from France, promised to revolutionize public transportation and make traditional trains obsolete. Based on the hovercraft technology, the Aérotrain wasn't only the fastest, but also offered by far the most comfortable ride to its passengers. And for a while, government officials from all over the world came to France so they could see the train of the future with their own eyes. However, half a century later, this crumbling hunk of concrete behind me is all that is left of a project that was never given the chance it deserved. Corruption, political plots, conflicts of interest, and personal egos all came in the way of progress and innovation. But the truth is that even in the 1960s, the hovercraft technology was nothing new. It relies on the ground effect, a phenomenon known since the previous century. Basically, it says that the lower a plane is flying, the more lift it gets, because air gets trapped and squeezed between the plane and the ground. However, the technology wasn't ready for the ground effect to be applied to real-life machines. That was until then. Because in 1962, an Englishman managed to build an amphibious vehicle relying on the ground effect. Not only that, but for the first time in history, there was now a hovercraft used to transport passengers on a regular line. On the other side of the English Channel, the French were also interested in hovercrafts. But unlike their British counterparts, who focused on amphibious vehicles, the French looked into land vehicles. More specifically, a man named Jean Bertin believed in the potential of the hovercraft technology more than anyone else. And he wasn't just a random dude. Jean Bertin graduated from Polytechnique, the most prestigious engineering school in the country. He also had his own company, which was responsible for many mechanical and aeronautical innovations, with over 100 patents to its name. But out of all these patents, there's one that stands out. It's the air cushion patent. And it radically improves the hovercraft technology. Initially, the military was the first interested in this new finding. They wanted Bertin to build them an off-road vehicle. But he had a much bigger project in mind, the Aérotrain. The idea was to put trains on air cushions along an inverted T-shaped rail to give passengers a smooth, quiet ride at high speed. And it just so happened that there was no better time for it. Indeed, better public transportation was a key priority for the government in place. The existing trains were too slow, and a new way to connect nearby cities to Paris more efficiently was needed. So in 1963, Bertin welcomes officials from the National State-owned Railway Company to present his project. These officials are responsible for the railroad network in the whole country. It's now or never. If he can convince them that his project is worth it, then the Aérotrain's commercial future is guaranteed. The meeting goes well, but after that, the railroad company starts requesting more information from Bertin. At first, there seem to be reasonable demands, but soon they pile up, and Bertin is forced to work non-stop and perform tests and studies, one after another, that he pays for from his own pocket. It's as if they're trying to find a reason to not support his project. And indeed, 6 months later, Bertin receives the devastating news. In reality, there was no chance the railroad guys would finance the Aérotrain. But Bertin will only discover why much later. However, all his work will not go to waste. Although the railroad company is state-owned, Bertin tries to reach out directly to the government. And it turns out that they are quite excited about the project. In fact, they even give their green light and provide funding so Bertin can finally build his first prototype. And he's not about to mess up such a golden opportunity. It's here, in the town of Gomez-le-Châtel, that Bertin tested his very first prototype. In fact, I am now standing on the original test track of the Aérotrain. And from the beginning, the experimental train managed to reach 125 miles per hour with no difficulty whatsoever. For comparison, trains back in the day couldn't go any faster than 85 miles per hour. And keep in mind that the Aérotrain only had this 4-mile-long track to reach its maximum speed. By all accounts, the first Aérotrain prototype was a huge success. Every day, visitors from all over the world would come to try the train of the future, and they could all attest to the Aérotrain's reliability, speed, and comfort. Even better was the simplicity of its design and the relative low cost associated with its construction and the track's maintenance. Indeed, the Aérotrain created very little friction on the track thanks to its cushions. As a result, maintenance costs associated with the track would be pretty cheap in comparison to regular trains. So it was decided. The government was going to provide funding to build a line meant to showcase the country's innovation for the upcoming 1968 Winter Olympics. But not everyone was happy with the success of Bertin's invention. Behind the scenes, some people managed to slow down the process enough so that the construction of this line couldn't happen. The first opportunity for the Aérotrain to transport actual travelers was missed. But Bertin didn't give his last word. In the meantime, he improved his hovercraft time and time again, reaching ever faster speeds up to the world record I mentioned at the beginning of the video. And with such incredible results, Bertin earned funding from the government to build the Aérotrain's first regular line. And this time, for sure, it's going to happen. The new track will connect Paris to the city of Orléans. About 80 miles from the capital, it is the perfect distance for Bertin's invention. And to make the most out of the Aérotrain, it was decided to elevate the track with this huge concrete structure. With that, the Aérotrain can go full speed the entire way without ever having to stop or cut traffic. It's also much safer for everyone given the speed of Bertin's train. However, it seems expensive to build such a massive infrastructure. So if you think that there is no way this project can be economically viable, you'd be right. Well, kind of. At least, there is no way it could make sense for a regular train. But the Aérotrain is no ordinary train. It's a lot lighter, so the track isn't actually crazy expensive, because this structure doesn't need to withstand that much weight. Besides, this location has also been chosen for how convenient it is to build such a track. The entire way between Paris and Orléans is as flat as can be, and the subsoil is ideal for this project. So construction began rapidly, and soon the first miles were in place. This was enough to conduct the first tests. And on this new track, the hovercraft proved to be as reliable and comfortable as the previous ones. With such good results, talks and interests about other Aérotrain lines emerged from all over the country and even in neighboring countries. But what Bertin didn't know is that despite the public's enthusiasm and his relentless efforts, this track would never be completed, let alone any other one. Indeed, while the entire world was excited about the future of this incredible technology, the railroad company wasn't so happy. The state-owned institution had been in charge of all the railroad infrastructure in the country for decades. There was no way they were going to allow a newcomer to take their place without a fight. Besides, the development of new highways and the democratization of the plane meant that people were already using the train less than before. They definitely did not need any more trouble. They had to eliminate this new competitor. But they had nothing to rival the Aérotrain. After all, their most innovative project in the works was a luxury train that would go a bit faster than their regular trains. But even that luxury train would barely go at half the speed of Bertin's Aérotrain, all while costing so much more to build. However, Bertin's demise comes from the fact that the railroad company never had to fight back on equal terms. You see, when the government decided to fund Bertin's project, they still had to put someone in charge of making sure Bertin was using the money properly. And what institution did the government entrust with the supervision of the Aérotrain? That's right, the state-owned railway company. You know, the only guys that absolutely did not want Bertin to succeed. As a result, all they had to do was to sabotage Bertin's project while pretending they were fulfilling their mission. After all, from the point of view of the government, the railroad officials were the subject experts. So no one even realized that they were imposing nonsense requirements on the Aérotrain. And there was nothing Bertin could do, because if it didn't comply, the project's funding would simply be cut. And when it comes to major infrastructure, whether it's a railroad, highway, or even an airport, you're not going to be able to finance it without the support of the government. That's how, among many other things, the Aérotrain ended up being forced to use a very expensive and complicated engine in the middle of the 1970s energy crisis. Of course, it wasn't enough for the railroad company to just slow down Bertin's project. No, what they were really after was to push their own project. The public's enthusiasm for the Aérotrain made it clear. People wanted faster trains. So the railroad company worked on a new design to create their own fast train. They called it the TGV. But unlike the Aérotrain, the TGV wouldn't be a hovercraft. Instead, it would be like a regular train, but enhanced for higher speeds. Turns out, it's a lot easier to make a good design when you don't have any stupid requirements to follow. However, it still wasn't obvious the TGV was any better than the Aérotrain. But it didn't need to be better. You see, Bertin was first and foremost an engineer, not a politician. He didn't have the deep connections with the government that the guys from the railroad company had. And the sad reality is that sometimes it's not about what you know, but who you know. The railroad company officials had a lot more influence than Bertin, and they didn't hesitate to use every trick in the book to promote their TGV. Not only did they lobby the government really hard, but they also affirmed that their TGV would be compatible with the existing railroad infrastructure. They said the tracks used by regular train would simply need to be slightly improved to support the new TGV. They argued that it would be a lot cheaper than building brand new custom tracks like what the Aérotrain needs. But this was all lies! Sure, the TGV tracks look like regular railroad tracks, but the truth is that they're completely different. But the truth didn't matter. From the point of view of the public and politicians who didn't understand much about the technology, the railroad company's TGV appeared like a better option than the Aérotrain. Add to that an aggressive media campaign to promote the TGV and criticize the Aérotrain, and that was it. Soon, the government cancelled Bertin's contract and withdrew funding from the Aérotrain's line between Paris and Orléans. Despite the setback, Bertin tried to keep going by himself. He used up all his personal money on his dream. He did everything he could to raise some money from whoever would be willing to support the Aérotrain. But like I said before, you can't build such an infrastructure without the support of the government. Taking off that funding was a death sentence for the Aérotrain. All these years of research, innovation, and evidence were reduced to nothing. Bertin, who had been working tirelessly the entire time, had sacrificed his own health in the process. Only a few months after the project stopped, Bertin, exhausted and disgusted by it all, passed away, taking with him any last hope for the once flying train of the future to be turned into reality. After Bertin's passing, the Aérotrain prototypes were left collecting dust and even got vandalized. All that is left now is 10 miles of concrete at the north of Orléans. It's a sad end for a project that never had a fair chance to prove itself and to compete against the TGV. Unfortunately, it's not always the most innovative who win in the end. Although the air cushion train is only a memory of the past, its influence lives on. Nowadays, the magnetic levitation train known as maglev is like a spiritual descendant of the Aérotrain, as the only kind of hovertrain technology that operates in the world. Unless someday someone decides to give a second chance to the air cushion train. In the meantime, this abandoned track will remain standing in the landscape as the ghost of a future that never happened.